So welcome to the webinar today. My name is Don Bowman with Agilicus, and I'm going to talk today a little bit about VPN alternatives. And when I say alternatives, I'm specifically saying the VPN is a very powerful tool. It's got a certain set of use cases it's great for, and for others, it's not so good. And we're going to talk about alternatives that are better for that. An example here is one I run into a lot is, think about your ice rink and somebody is managing the lights and the HVAC equipment. You don't really want them VPN'd in and having access to your ERP system. That's a third-party company. They can't install your VPN on their laptop. They don't have your multi-factor, et cetera, but they have a legitimate need to interact with your infrastructure. And we're going to talk a little bit about how, that's become more important in light of some very recent very high-profile VPN vulnerability disclosures from CISA with 3 very popular VPNs from Ivanti, Cisco, and Fortinet. So we're going to talk about local government remote needs. So there's lots and lots of people that interact with your infrastructure. They might be contractors that work on singular systems like the GIS or ERP. They might be, single task-based workers that don't have a desk, bus drivers working with the, timesheeting system, et cetera. And what we found during COVID was the VPN's usage was dramatically extended. And there's some good, bad, and ugly things associated with that, but the ugly part is risk. And we're going to talk about some alternatives and how we can do, single sign-on, multi-factor, strong authentication in a easier fashion for end users that are more loosely associated with you, and some notable benefits there. So the first thing I thought I would do is a little poll. Feel free to answer however you like. There's no science behind this, and the results are mostly anonymous. But think about the third party who manages the ice and lights at the rink. What should they do? Should they get in a truck and drive to your office like your grandfather did? Should they install your VPN software on their laptop and VPN to your network, even though they might have other clients they support and that's inconvenient? Should they have a shadow account in your Active Directory and just you pretend that they're kind of like an employee? Do you think they should just get paid more and maybe that makes it go away? Or do you think maybe there should be a way for them to be more efficient with no direct access and some single sign-on? So give that a second or so. Seems people like E. I will stipulate the question might have been slightly loaded. I was expecting maybe somebody would say A, but you'll see what happens there. So it looks like I'm going to close it out. The people that have answered are all about E, and that's what we think as well. So in terms of the needs, what are the needs that are out there? Local governments have a lot of disparate systems, and there's more user types than most similar sized businesses. This is one of the things that really intrigued me about this space when I first started this company. Is it didn't really matter how small or large the city was. It has about the same number of systems. There's still dog licensing and solid waste pickup and so on, whether there's 5,000 people or 50,000 people or 500,000 people. And the other thing that really intrigued me here is IT is not, it's a supporting function, but it's not really, they're not IT companies. And the third thing is there's a ton of infrastructure which it's not moving to SaaS tomorrow. Your HVAC system, your building management system, facilities, locks, doors, et cetera, cameras, these are not going to become Office 365 and cloud and somebody else's problem ever, let alone anytime soon, which means that there's always going to be that risk that something can get in through one of those systems and move sideways through something else. And we've seen this a lot in the last years. There was a Vegas casino that was hacked through its fish tank, for example. And you're seeing it a lot. Sometimes there's back doors in these systems. The company that puts in a cellular modem just so they can make sure they can support it for you. You think about solid waste, wastewater, industrial control systems. Those things are really complicated to secure. They have a very trusting worldview of the universe, and that is inside is infinitely secure. Forget second factor, usually they don't have first factor. A PLC, and if you can get to it on UDP 14818, you own that PLC. things aren't patched. It's considered a bad form to go down and out of service. So you end up with something running XP or Windows 2008, you're running SQL Server, and it's never been patched. It's from the day it was put in there. But then you think about other, very singular purpose things, ERP, CRM, permits, and bylaw, and you've got users that have legitimate needs to access those that are remote, but that's the only system they access. So the VPN is a good tool. It's like a long Ethernet cable. It gives you access to everything conveniently, but it's very inconvenient to give you access to one thing. And think about all these different constituents, staff, contractors, vendors, council, upper and lower peer organizations. The county works with the city, and they each have different systems. They each have different identity providers, different tenants in Microsoft Azure, Active Directory, or Google Workplace, Okta. And it becomes a little bit complicated to stitch all this together. The VPN is not a cure-all in this case. So what we normally see when people try to make it so is end up creating shadow accounts. And the shadow account, really the challenge comes in is they create company accounts. So in the industrial space, we see the Siemens account, but Siemens has 200,000 employees. What does that mean to have one account? Who knows that password after they've left the company? Where does the VPN go? The VPN goes to everything. So you're basically, anybody who's ever worked in that company has access to everything in your organization. And now you're relying on the strength on the inside of your company, which may not be as strong. So the VPN, I talked about the VPN alternatives here, but, VPN is really, it's just modeled as really a long Ethernet cable. It gives you layer 2 and or layer 3 adjacency. You can put in ACLs, they're called access control lists, and try to control where it can go. But in a nutshell, it's designed to go everything. It's all or nothing. It's on or off. And that was really what sparked the controversy at the beginning of this year. We saw the U.S. CISA, cybersecurity infrastructure organization, come out with a mandate, the Ivanti VPN. It has to be out of your network by Friday. That's really short term. And you think about, when you read that thing, it said you can't even just upgrade it, because the way the malware worked, it was like a rootkit that got into the upgrade process. So when you upgraded it, it stayed around. So you thought you'd re-imaged it, but it's stuck. And that is your gateway between secure and insecure, and suddenly somebody else has access to it. And everybody kind of shrugged that off. Ivanti is a well-known vendor, but they're not Cisco or Fortinet. I use Cisco and Fortinet. Few. A week later, saw the same thing come out, but for Fortinet, the SSL Connect, etc. Thank God I don't use Fortinet. I use Cisco, and then a week later, you got Cisco AnyConnect. Basically the same emergency mandate. You got to go patch everything. And that's the problem, is you've got this one thing that has access to everything, that has accounts for lots of people. And is there an alternative that would make sense in a defense in depth architecture without getting rid of the VPN for the IT team supporting everything, those task-based workers that are using the GIS or the ice rink? What can we do for them? And that's what I'm here to talk about today. So the good part about that VPN, people say it just works. It's like being there. There's no additional steps once it's up. I can leave it running forever. The transport's encrypted. I trust this vendor. It's got very strong encryption. Everybody likes that. It's a good thing, right? No one ever got fired for deploying a VPN. I bet you that statement is no longer true. So a couple of years ago, there was a huge outcry in the United States, the Colonial Pipeline disaster. So one VPN, one third-party contractor, overbroad access on the ACL, and a G8 nation lost gasoline supply on the East Coast. That's a huge thing. Wars start over that. That's the 21st century equivalent of shooting an archduke in Austria. It's a big, big deal. And now people are thinking in terms of that defense in depth. A VPN is part of their strategy, but it's only one part. It's not the all or nothing that we used to think of it as. So that on the bad part of that VPN, coming back to one of the things I'm encouraging you to think about here, if you haven't already, is that third party, that hypothetical person in my poll who supports my ice rink. They don't work for me. They might just work for themselves, or they might work for a local HVAC company, but they support other customers. What they don't want is your software on their laptop. Can't do it, right? It's just too complicated. They got 30 customers to support, or they're going to have 30 different versions of a VPN installed. It's impossible for them. So you don't like it, they don't like it. There's also licensing issues that could come up. So it's really a bad solution. There's other models that people try to use to get around this, but in a nutshell, when you're using a VPN for this, it doesn't work. But the bad is also a little bit more, people talk about my video calls break up when the VPN is up. And really, this is an artifact of the VPNs. There's two main strategies with VPNs. One's called split horizon. In split horizon, you put a VPN up that attracts just a little bit of your traffic and the rest leaves your PC. There's a bunch of risks associated with that. It means you've got one device on two networks at the same time, and it's got access to the public internet without going through your filtering, and maybe it becomes a gateway, and you don't like that. So you switch to non-split horizon VPN. In that model, you open up your video conferencing, Google Meet, Microsoft Teams, and all your traffic flows into your company and then back out again. So you do this company meeting with 50 people on it, and all 50 people, they're upstream from their house is going into your company and coming back out, and suddenly your internet bandwidth in your office isn't enough. And they don't really understand why this is happening. But other people give other little, paper cut type, complaints. I can't print at home. I want to use a tablet, but your VPN client's not available for it. In my company, I use 192.168.1.0/24, and you do as well. And how do I can't route to you because I have the same subnet on the other side, so I have to change my subnets to work with you. Going back to that person managing your rank, assuming they understood what a subnet was, do you really think that if they had 30 clients, they would want to change the subnets on their laptop every time they connect? It just doesn't make sense. So you often see this sort of tacit, let's just all share one account and share the multi-factor somehow. Can we use SMS for multi-factor so we can reflect the message to everybody? Thanks. You should never allow people to use SMS for multi-factor, in my opinion. So the ugly part of the VPN, we just talked about those emergency directives, but you're importing the risk of those third parties to you. They get ransomware, you get it because now you're connected. The SMB flows, Active Directory, those emergency directives, they were really designed to cause people to stop and think. They need a firewall on each side of their VPN. They need multiple VPNs. They need them going to different areas. Really, it's time to deploy zero trust in that model, which is what I'm here to talk about today, is a model where each resource is treated like it was in its own island, and individual user signs in with their native identity credentials. So I'm Don at Agillicus, and you say, okay, Don, I want you to help me with my GIS. I'm going to give you access, but just to the GIS. I don't get an IP on your network. I don't get anything. I just get GIS access. So that fine-grained access, the VPN is really not a good tool for this. It really doesn't work for fine-grained audit, and it really doesn't work well when you have those third-party users. They usually become shared accounts. And as a consequence, when something bad happens, what's the first question? Who did what? And you're like, well, I don't know who and what. Well, the VPN's been up for a week, so I don't know what exactly happened on it. So it's not all doom and gloom. When we get into VPN alternatives, there are alternatives, and the alternatives are easy to deploy. They don't require any substantive changes, and they're a lot simpler for those end users. Rather than trying to push a complicated IT-centric solution to them, recognize that they're task-based workers who are much more used to working with websites. And you want to make those things look like websites, even if they're remote desktop, or VNC, or the HMI of the wastewater system. You can bring all these into a web paradigm where the user is using their single sign-on on the web, click, sign in, icon, right there. Because it's browser-based, it works on their tablet, it works on their phone, works on the bring your own device, which is usually what you're going to need for those third parties. You can't force them to use your devices without creating shadow accounts and all that. So that connectivity nirvana, if we reframe the problem and say, in a hypothetical VPN alternative world, what would these task workers like to see? They really only want to know about and access the resources they need. Your wiki, your pay stub, your ice machine, your PLC, the building management, the HVAC, the historian of your SCADA that you're doing some reporting from. Any of those things, those task-based workers, they don't want to know about the rest of your world. They just want that to behave as if it was adjacent to them or on the public internet. They want to do it from wherever they are on whatever network they are. They don't want to change their IP or anything like that. They don't have to drive into your office to do it. That's cost, that's money, that's time. That time you spend in that truck driving back and forth is not productive. They want to do it on the device of their choice. So they don't want you dictating what they use for software. They're just going to use Google Chrome on a tablet, and that's going to be it. Pull over the side of the road, check the HMI, click, add more salt, boom, done. Why should you get involved in that equation? As the browser has become that nearly the entire platform, and although the browsers are complicated, they have actually a pretty good security track record. It doesn't seem like it because you see every day there's some security flaw, but they pour a lot of effort into it compared to the alternatives. You know, the amount of time and money and bug bounties that go into Edge and Chrome and Safari is so high compared to the applications that you're using that would sit underneath and through your VPN. Like, you know, you're getting a patch to Chrome every couple of days, whereas your ERP system, you know, it's every 2 years probably. Single sign-on. This is really important to me. And people, it takes a little bit to understand it. You know, from a my company standpoint, you want to sign in with your corporate identity provider. Say you sign into Office 365, you sign into this. You don't want another username and password because people are going to write it down, or people are not going to change it. So having that one is much, much, much stronger. But it's also stronger from a training standpoint. Training those users to recognize the login screen makes it harder to spearfish them. You know, if your company is used to the idea of random different login experiences that look different colors and fonts and this and that, and I send you an email saying, hey, we've changed our banking information, people are going to click on it. But if it's always exactly the same, it's my logo and theme and font and color and here's where you look, they get it. That works for those third parties as well. There's no reason that person who manages your ICE equipment, who works for that HVAC company, can't sign into your system using their Azure, their Google Workplace. Single sign-on, no password. You don't get a password from them. It just works. There's no reason you can't do that. In fact, that's what our customers do. So at Agilicus, that's what we're really all about, is fixing that problem of who are you, what are you allowed to do, how do we get you there with single sign-on, with no new usernames, no new passwords. It's called Identity Federation. So it's their Azure, your Azure, their Google Workplace. Sometimes they don't have a company. This just becomes Gmail or their Apple ID. And you're not giving anything away. You're not giving Google permission to use your system or Microsoft because you own the authorization. You're just delegating the identity to that. So that really becomes the important part of the VPN alternative, is having a really friction-free identity and authentication model where users can use their natural identity and you can then assign them permission. That becomes the nut to solve here. So that's what zero trust is all about. You know, this is a buzzword that you've heard for a few years now, and some people have written it off as just another hype cycle, a thing, and other people think it's, you know, a mountain that has to be climbed and every system has to be changed and so on. It's not really like that. You know, what is zero trust? Zero trust is three main things. So the first is the who problem. Who are you? You know, that's identity. Every user that you're going to interact with digitally has an existing online digital identity. And you don't really need to create a new one. So it might be their personal Gmail or Apple ID. It could be their corporate Google Workplace, Azure, Okta, but they all do. And the reason they do is they work online. You know, they've got a mobile phone, they have to sign into it some way. They have a Windows PC, they have to sign into it some way. They have a Microsoft account, they sign into it. Those are existing and they're trustworthy. You can still apply multi-factor in the authorization stage to force them in case they haven't set that up themselves. You still get to control what they do, but that means that's non-shared identity. Rather than having that Siemens account for this giant company, instead you have exactly one person, each person. It's Joe at Siemens, it's Jane at Siemens. You know who's doing what, where, and you control it. And when Siemens fires someone for a cause, because it's going to happen, it's a big company, they take them out of that identity system like that, and they no longer can access yours. You don't have to wait and get a letter from their HR 6 months later. By the way, this person's not with us anymore. You're like, uh-oh, I wonder what they've been doing the last 6 months. The second part, so that's the who problem. The second problem to solve is the what problem. What are you allowed to do? It's called authorization. Authorization means the rules. So I'm allowed to edit the wiki. I'm allowed to print on that printer. I'm allowed to be in the office after 6 p.m. These are the rules. So when you think about authorization, it can be fine or coarse. Coarse just means on off. I can or cannot use that thing. But fine-grained can be a little more nuanced. It can be, I can have a read-only view on VNC. I can watch what's happening on the screen but not interact with it. Let's go back to the wastewater part of the local government space. It's not very sexy, but it's pretty important. And it's full of these little devices called HMIs, human machine interfaces. And they're kind of like tablet PCs from the mid-90s. They're not that high-end looking. And they usually run a protocol called VNC, which from a security standpoint, it's not that high-end. Giving read-only access to that is often what people need, because that's the alarm panel. I see there's an alarm in site 2, I see that this has happened, etc. They don't need to do anything on it. So you can have a user that has permission to read or read-write on that. And the same with a lot of web interfaces. Sometimes the web interfaces are APIs, sometimes they're not. But when you get into a big fat client like SAP or something, it might be just on-off and it's handled within the application. But that authorization trail, you first figured out who they are. They've gone through single sign-on, click sign in with Azure, your corporate identity. Boom, now I know who you are. Okay, that person is in the group that has read-only access here, etc. And then the last problem is the how problem. How do we get you there? So the how problem, this is really what Agillicus excels at. You don't want, I said everything behaves as if it was on the public internet, but obviously you don't literally do that. You've got a site that's out of town, it's got Starlink, it's got no inbound abilities, you get this other one that's on a cellular modem, you get this other one that's behind NAT, you've got a 2-level. One of my customers has a 2-level NAT. The county runs their internet for them, and they each have their own NAT. There's just no way to do inbound traffic or port forwarding. It just doesn't work. With our system, there's a single outbound connection, and everything is multiplexed back down through that after it's gone through these first 2 phases, which means it works in any network environment, and it's seamless. The user interacts with things without a connect, as you have with a VPN. It's just they pick up their mobile phone and click, and it's right there. Whether it be RDP, remote desktop, whether it be VNC, which is another remote desktop protocol, whether it be a share, whether it be a website, web application, whether it be a traditional Windows FAT client, SSH, any of those things, they interact with natively as if each one were on the internet to get individually. Once they get into one, it gives them no permission to the others. So even if their credentials are stolen, somebody walks up to them, puts a gun to their head, the device isn't VPN'd into you. They can't steal it and get access. So the blast radius is reduced to what you've done there. So from an end user standpoint, this is where it gets really simple. So most of our customers today in their municipalities and local governments, the end users are task-based workers. They're recording their commercial vehicle operator record hours of service. They're drivers. They're bylaw enforcement officers taking a picture of a license plate. There are people doing permits and taxes things, town tax. They're ones that are using the GIS and uploading new information and layers. And they're, most importantly, ones that are using industrial control systems, water, wastewater, solid waste. The companies that support them in these areas, that ice rink, that building management system, there's no time to train those people. So for them, this is so much simpler. There's a web interface they go to. It shows an icon for every app they have access to, and shows another set of icons for ones that they don't currently that they can request. They click on that in the browser, and it opens right away, even if the application is not natively web-based. And they love it. Multi-factor, nobody loves multi-factor, but it's easy. They can use the biometrics on the phone if you allow them to. They can use a code-based authenticator, Microsoft Authenticator, Google Authenticator, etc. They use a native interface with native identity, with no new usernames and passwords to write down, and no onboarding process. It's really simple. They log in with their existing company login, even if they don't work for you, and they just get their work done, which is really what you're trying to get to. You don't want them thinking about how they get there. You just want them enjoying the sausage, not having to know how the sausage is made. And there's no layer 3, there's no routing, there's no IP routes, subnets. Your video conferencing is not broken, as it is in the VPN case, because the user's traffic is only flowing for this resource where it goes. It's kind of like split horizon, if you will. So why does this reduce the risk? So, this is something that it really reduces the risk. You'll see this a lot. This is why Zero Trust is promoted so strongly, is the concept of a blast radius. I have a perfect audit trail of who did what when, and I know that they couldn't have got outside of what they were given access to. So even a malicious user can't walk sideways, let alone malicious software on their own PC. So if their PC is hacked, cracked, and attacked, they might have an access token for one of your things, but not others. You'll see in the audit trail what they did access. There's no need to do shared accounts. Shared accounts are evil. Some argue they're a necessary evil. I argue they're not a necessary evil. It's just as simple and cost effective to not have shared accounts. But as soon as you get rid of that shared account, then you don't have to worry about, well, we can't do multi-factor because multiple people have this, so how do I give them the key fob? You don't have to worry about who has access that has left the organization, is no longer trusted. A few years ago, there was a bit of an incident in Florida in a water treatment plant, and it was, somebody had installed TeamViewer and there was a shared password. And this is really what we're talking about here. I don't want to use words like shadow IT, but it's often things that are below the radar of the primary. They wouldn't have maybe done this for PeopleSoft or SAP, but installing TeamViewer in this water plant outside of town, nobody really wants to drive there at night. The 7 of us on the team, we all trust each other, right? We'll create a username and password, we'll write it down, we'll share it. But unfortunately, one of the people used it somewhere else, and that other thing got hacked, and somebody got in, and they changed the chemicals, and it's dangerous. So it reduces your risk by forcing users to sign in with their native identity. When they get fired, their HR team takes them out right away, boom. Because it's their native identity, they don't need to have it write it down somewhere. Because it's single sign-on, the phishing risk is reduced. The login screen is very consistent for them all the time, because you can apply a second factor in your organization, even on behalf of those other ones. You don't have to worry about them having weak passwords, etc. Two-factor right away, your risk is dramatically reduced. But that overbroad access is gone now. That blast radius is smaller. So even when something bad does happen, it doesn't get any further. That audit trail, the enforcing the multi-factor, removing the VPN means only the resource and not the network is accessible. So sometimes you might have in the PLC space, you might have something where it has TFTP and Telnet on it, and you really don't want. So a VPN is very hard to say you have only access to one protocol, but not the others. But in Zero Trust, they each become their own thing. But it's also, because there's no shared software or licenses, there's no software installed, you don't have to worry about, the vectors on the machine getting in there. You're really only having to trust the identity provider and the browser, which I believe is an acceptable risk. In terms of implementation, one of the most common questions asked is, this seems like it's a lot of work. Am I rethinking the world into a Zero Trust paradigm? Am I going to be hiring a bunch of consultants who are going to come in and drink my coffee and eat my sandwiches and bill me for a year, and then build a strat plan that I go to get budget for over 3-year capital, etc.? And the answer is no. The answer is you could get going within an hour or two, because you get to sort of pick one thing and then expand out from it. So the unified authentication, there's no configuration at all. Neither you nor your partners have any config. This is a native thing that's been available. A lot of organizations that are on this call, you've made the investments to transition to Google Workplace, to Microsoft Azure, Office 365, and those are natively available single sign-on into nearly anything. There's a thing called the single sign-on tax. There's a lot of software that sees this as an opportunity to get money from you. Systems like ours are what are called identity-aware proxies. We do authentication on behalf of the application. So you can take that legacy application that you're not really sure what's inside it or whether the programmers are still alive, and you can provide single sign-on with multi-factor on behalf of it. We've done that with some really old Visual Basic town tax type applications, and it just works for them. So those are fat clients. They still launch them as executables, but they no longer have complete network access. They just have what they need to get going. So that implementation, you just basically have to know the names of the users. And there's even a request flow they can sign up themselves, and you can just grant them as they go. But those organizations, that MSP that supports you, whatever, it's like no config at all. You just type in their email address, and then select what they're allowed access to, and boom, it's there. And that precise authorization, you narrow it in and say it's read only on this, etc. And you can start with one resource, one application. A very common one that we started with is something in the industrial side of the local government. So VT SCADA is an example application, or Ignition. These are sort of SCADA front-end type, HMI type software that people interact with, and a very small number of people with very specialized skill sets need to use them. And you start there and you roll out 3 users, and then you roll out 5, and next thing you know, all of these task-based workers are on the platform, and there really wasn't an implementation cost at all, other than our license fee, of course. And it's seamless for those users. So they usually give it rave reviews. They're like, well, this is a lot simpler than the alternatives. The alternative being either driving there or having to share a multi-factor on a shared account with a VPN that has to be installed on a laptop that, oh, I need customer A's laptop. The company that's supporting you doesn't want to think about that problem. So my call to arms here, call to action, I guess, is first is you have to recognize that there's this growing underserved demographic. A bunch of years ago, there was the core IT stuff and everything else didn't have an IP address. A thermostat was a thermostat. And suddenly a thermostat has an LCD display and a GUI and a battery backup and an IP address and DHCP and software updates. The world is heading this way. It's heading this way in agriculture, tractors, John Deere. You can't buy a John Deere tractor without agreeing to have 4G plus GPS, plus you can't repair it. Some lawsuits on this topic. You're seeing the same in industrial equipment. Siemens won't sell you this specific chiller without them having access to it. You're seeing it on, printers, printer as a service, et cetera. Things are getting smarter, which means the skill sets to use them are getting more specialized, and they're moving online with big data and cloud. And that means each one of those things, it might be physically bolted to your wall and going to be there for 30 years, but it's bringing this risk into your organization. And security is also unfortunately getting more important with the geopolitical situation in the world today, which is why CISA had to issue those 3 emergency directives. They didn't do it just because there were weaknesses found in those VPNs. That's not their mission. They have something called the Known Exploited Vulnerabilities Catalog, KEV, and there were bad actors, bad state-sponsored actors that were hacking these specific VPNs, including CISA themselves. They were the ones using that Ivanti one, and they got hacked. And think about how much they're probably able to invest in cybersecurity compared to the typical local government. It's probably very disparate. But that security is getting more and more important. A lot of municipalities have unfortunately succumbed to ransomware, and it gets in, and you need to think about segmenting the network, zero trust, reducing the blast radius, etc. That lateral traversal is very, very costly from a what did they get, cleanup, embarrassment, release of data standpoint. The second part of that growing underserved demographic, it's not going away. You can't just ostrich head in the sand. Those people don't need a remote access, get in their truck and drive here like my granddad did. It's not a thing anymore. Or if it is a thing, it's expensive. The VPN is not an appropriate solution for everything. I am not here to say you need to turn your VPN off tomorrow. It serves a valid need for certain activities. Site-to-site VPN maybe is a good idea with IPsec, or specific type of administrator might need access, but it really is not an appropriate one-size-fits-all solution to start rolling out to the permits department, the bylaw department, the snowplow removal, etc. They have a small set of needs underneath it. The people that are supporting your PLCs, your HVAC, your BMS, your building management systems, they're not going to install your VPN software on their devices. They're just not going to do it. And if you give them usernames and passwords, they're going to share them. You can't avoid it. They want to have a call center of people to support you, not individual people. That lateral traversal risk means you're importing their business risk directly into yours. So the VPN is not appropriate for this. Understand that single sign-on and multi-factor, it's very achievable. It's very, very achievable because of the identity-aware proxy strategy that I'm espousing here. It's not that complicated to do. After this call, I'm going to reach out to you. I'm going to ask if you want to see a demo, and it only takes a couple seconds to see the demo. I was going to do one in here, but it's a little clunky to show within the webinar platform, but it really is fairly simple. And you can set it up because it's a proxy. You don't even have to change the upstream application. It doesn't even know in most cases. And you can do that not just for your team, but for any team in the world. Even if it's, we're launching a new website and we're working with that graphics firm and they're doing some photos they want to upload to my share, boom, you can do it with no shared accounts and no new accounts. So the last part of my call to action is just get a hold of me. I'm going to reach out to you after this, and I would, love to engage with you. You're welcome to tell me I'm wrong or you disagreed with something or, anything of that nature. But, I'd love to hear what your experience has been and what your challenges have been and how I can help with them. That's really how we grow together. But, on our website, you can book something directly onto my calendar. You can give me a call, email, don@agilicus.com, and I got some advice I'm willing to share, and you might think it's wrong. You might take it under advisement. But if I can do a demo for you and I can provide some value, that's really what I want you to do, is just engage with us. So with that, if there are any questions, I would suggest posting them in the chat. Otherwise, thank you very much for attending today. The recording will be available. We'll send an email out in the next couple of days with the recording to everybody, and you're welcome to share it with your team. And again, if you think that I got something right or wrong, or you want to school me on something, I would absolutely love the feedback. And we look forward to working with you in the future.